I'm a certified nurse-midwife at Moonstone Regional Medical Center in Bellingham, Washington, or at least I was, until I submitted my resignation 3 weeks ago. You can call me Dr. Isabella Ramirez if you want, though most people in the maternity ward just called me the miracle worker during my 23 years there. I've delivered over 4,200 babies and guided families through every kind of birth you can imagine: emergency C-sections, breech births, triplets, premature deliveries, and every complication the sacred process of childbirth can present. But what I'm about to tell you about is the one case that made me question everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the precise moment a soul enters this world. It's the case that ultimately led me to leave the profession entirely, and it involves a pair of eyes that still haunt my dreams every single night. Moonstone Regional Medical Center sits on a bluff overlooking Bellingham Bay, serving the greater Whatcom County area and the San Juan Islands of Washington State, as well as parts of southern British Columbia. It's a comprehensive medical facility with a state-of-the-art level IV NICU and one of the most advanced maternal fetal medicine programs in the Pacific Northwest. During my time there, I specialized in the most challenging and high-risk pregnancies, cases involving gestational diabetes, severe preeclampsia, placenta accreta, twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome, and other conditions that could threaten both mother and baby during the most critical moments of delivery. The case I'm about to tell you about actually began long before I ever met the patient, in a sequence of events that seemed ordinary at the time but would later reveal themselves to be part of something far more extraordinary and inexplicable than anything I had encountered in my career. It started on November 14, 2020, in the picturesque mountain town of Glacier, Washington, population 211, nestled in the foothills of the North Cascades, about 45 miles east of Bellingham. Celestine Aurora Blackwood was 29 years old and 8.5 months pregnant with her first child. She worked as a wildlife photographer and nature guide, spending most of her time documenting the incredible biodiversity of the North Cascades ecosystem. Celestine had moved to Glacier 5 years earlier from San Francisco, seeking a quieter life, surrounded by the natural beauty she had always felt called to protect and capture through her lens. Her pregnancy had been textbook perfect from the very beginning. Every prenatal appointment, every ultrasound, every blood test had come back with ideal results. The baby Maite, a girl she had already named Luna, was developing beautifully, positioned correctly for delivery, and showing all the signs of robust health that expectant mothers and their doctors hoped to see. Celestine's obstetrician, Dr. Amanda Frost, had told her just the week before that she could expect a smooth, uncomplicated delivery sometime in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Celestine had been documenting her pregnancy journey through photography, creating a series she called Growing Life that captured the changing relationship between her body, the natural world around her, and the developing child within her. She had been featured in several photography magazines for her unique perspective on pregnancy in nature, and her work had gained a significant following on social media among women who appreciated her artistic and spiritual approach to motherhood. November 14th was an unusually warm autumn day in the Cascades, with temperatures reaching nearly 60 degrees and clear skies that offered perfect conditions for outdoor photography. Celestine had driven up to Picture Lake, a pristine alpine lake known for its mirror-perfect reflections of Mount Shuxan, to capture what she hoped would be some of her final pregnancy photographs before Luna's arrival. She had been working alone, as she often did, setting up her camera equipment on the shores of the lake and taking self-portraits that incorporated the stunning mountain landscape as a backdrop for her 8.5-month pregnant silhouette. The images she captured that day would later be described by art critics as some of the most hauntingly beautiful pregnancy photographs ever taken, though they would also be her last. At approximately 3:45 p.m., while Celestine was positioning herself for what she intended to be the final shot of the day, she experienced what she later described to paramedics as the most intense pain I've ever felt, like someone had struck me with lightning from the inside. She doubled over, her expensive camera equipment tumbling onto the rocky shore of the lake, and realized that she was going into labor nearly 3 weeks early and completely alone in one of the most remote areas of the North Cascades. Celestine managed to call 911 on her cell phone, though the signal was weak and kept cutting out. The emergency dispatcher could barely hear her, but managed to get her approximate location before the call dropped entirely. What followed was one of the most challenging mountain rescues that Whatcom County Search and Rescue had ever attempted. The terrain around Picture Lake is notoriously difficult to navigate, accessible only by a winding mountain road that becomes treacherous in bad weather, and then a steep hiking trail that even experienced mountaineers find challenging. In November, with early snow already beginning to accumulate at higher elevations, the rescue teams faced additional complications of weather and visibility. It took search and rescue teams nearly 4 hours to reach Celestine, following GPS coordinates from her last cell phone ping and using helicopters to scan the area until they could locate her silver Subaru Outback parked at the trailhead. When they finally found her, she was in advanced labor, lying on a sleeping bag beside the lake, conscious but in severe distress, and dangerously hypothermic from the dropping mountain temperatures. "Please," she whispered to the first paramedic who reached her, a veteran search and rescue volunteer named Michael Torres. "Something's wrong. I can't feel her moving anymore. Please save my baby." The paramedics immediately recognized that they were dealing with a medical emergency that was beyond the scope of what they could handle in the field. Celestine was experiencing what appeared to be placental abruption, a condition where the placenta separates from the uterine wall before delivery, cutting off the baby's oxygen supply and causing life-threatening bleeding for the mother. Without immediate surgical intervention, both mother and baby would likely die within hours. The helicopter evacuation from Picture Lake was complicated by mountain winds, gathering clouds, and the approaching darkness of a November evening. The flight to Moonstone Regional Medical Center took 35 minutes, 35 critical minutes during which Celestine's condition continued to deteriorate, and her baby's heart rate, monitored by portable equipment, showed increasing signs of severe distress. I was the senior midwife on duty that evening when the emergency call came through our trauma communication system. It was unusual for us to receive mountain rescue cases, as most wilderness emergencies were handled by hospitals closer to the Cascade Range, but the severity of Celestine's condition and our specialized maternal fetal medicine capabilities made us the best option for this particular case. Incoming critical 29-year-old female, approximately 38 weeks gestation, suspected placental abruption, following premature labor onset in remote location, severe hypothermia, patient and fetal distress. ETA 12 minutes. The dispatcher's voice crackled over our intercom system. Our trauma team assembled with the efficiency that comes from years of handling life and death emergencies. Dr. Rachel Montenegro, our head of maternal fetal medicine, and one of the most skilled obstetricians I had ever worked with. Dr. Kevin Chang, from emergency surgery. Dr. Sarah Winters from the NICU. Our anesthesiology team led by Dr. Marcus Thompson, and myself as the lead midwife coordinating care. We had handled dozens of similar emergencies over the years, but something about this particular case made me feel unusually anxious, though I couldn't identify exactly why. When the helicopter touched down on our helipad at 8:23 p.m., Celestine's condition was even more critical than the paramedics had initially described. She was barely conscious, her skin was gray and cold from hypothermia and blood loss. Her blood pressure was dangerously low. The fetal monitoring equipment was showing a heart rate pattern that indicated her baby was in severe distress and might not survive much longer without immediate delivery. Dr. Montenegro took one look at the monitors and made the decision that would save both their lives. They were going straight to OR2 for an emergency cesarean. "Sarah, I need you to prep for immediate delivery. This baby needs to come out right now." As we rushed Celestine through the corridors of Moonstone Regional toward the operating room, she grabbed my hand with surprising strength for someone in her condition. Her eyes, which I would later learn were an unusual shade of violet blue, locked onto mine with an intensity that took me completely off guard. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the sound of the gurney wheels and the urgent conversations of our medical team. "If something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of Luna. Promise me you'll make sure she knows how much I wanted her." I had heard similar requests from dozens of mothers facing emergency deliveries over the years, but something about the way Celestine looked at me in that moment felt different. There was a depth of awareness in her eyes, a sense that she understood something about what was about to happen that the rest of us didn't. I squeezed her hand and gave her the reassurance that I always gave in these situations, though I had no way of knowing at the time how profoundly that promise would affect the rest of my life. "You're going to be fine, and so is Luna," I told her as we reached the operating room doors. "I've been doing this for 23 years, and I'm going to make sure you both get through this safely." The emergency C-section began at 8:31 p.m. and was completed in record time. Dr. Montenegro's surgical skills were exceptional, and despite the complications of Celestine's condition, she was able to deliver Luna at 8:39 p.m., just 8 minutes after the first incision. Luna Blackwood entered the world weighing 6 pounds 4 ounces, a healthy weight for a baby born 3 weeks early, but she was blue, not breathing, and showed no immediate signs of life. Her umbilical cord had been compressed during the placental abruption, cutting off her oxygen supply for an unknown period of time during the hours that Celestine had been in labor beside Picture Lake. Dr. Winters and the NICU team immediately began resuscitation efforts, while Dr. Chang joined Dr. Montenegro to address the massive bleeding that had been caused by the placental abruption. For the next hour and a half, both mother and daughter fought for their lives in the same operating room, separated by just a few feet, but each facing their own critical medical challenges. Luna's resuscitation was touch and go for the first 20 minutes. Dr. Winters later told me that there were moments when she wasn't sure they would be able to get Luna's heart beating strongly enough to sustain life. But gradually, through a combination of medications, assisted ventilation, and what Dr. Winters described as pure determination, Luna began to respond to their efforts. Her heart rate stabilized, she began breathing with assistance, and her color slowly improved from blue to pink. Celestine's situation was more complicated. The placental abruption had caused significant blood loss, and the hours of labor in near freezing temperatures had put additional stress on her cardiovascular system. Dr. Montenegro and Dr. Chang worked methodically to control the bleeding, remove damaged tissue, and restore normal blood flow to her vital organs. By 10:15 p.m., they had managed to stabilize her condition enough to close the surgical incision and transfer her to our intensive care unit. Luna was moved to our level IV NICU, where she was placed on a ventilator and connected to the most advanced monitoring equipment we had available. Her initial brain scans showed some signs of oxygen deprivation, though Dr. Winters was cautiously optimistic that the damage might not be permanent. Babies are remarkably resilient, especially when they receive prompt medical intervention, and Luna had several factors working in her favor. This was where my role in their story truly began to take shape, though I had no way of understanding at the time just how extraordinary and inexplicable the coming weeks would prove to be. As the senior midwife, I was responsible for coordinating care between our various departments, serving as the primary liaison with Celestine's family, and providing the kind of ongoing support that families need when facing extended hospital stays and uncertain outcomes. Celestine's parents, Dr. Marcus Blackwood and Professor Ophelia Blackwood, arrived at Moonstone Regional early the next morning, having driven through the night from their home in Spokane. Marcus was a retired veterinarian who had spent his career working with wildlife rehabilitation programs, and Ophelia was a professor of comparative literature at Eastern Washington University who specialized in nature writing and environmental philosophy. They were intelligent, thoughtful people who had supported Celestine's decision to pursue her unconventional career as a wilderness photographer, even when it meant she would be living far from family and taking risks that worried them. "How are they?" Dr. Blackwood asked me when I met them in our family consultation room early Saturday morning. "The doctors told us the surgery went well, but we need to understand what we're really dealing with here." I explained the medical situation as clearly and honestly as I could. "Celestine is stable but still sedated, while her body recovers from the surgery and the hypothermia. The blood loss was significant, but Dr. Montenegro was able to control the bleeding, and all of her vital signs are improving. Luna is in our NICU receiving intensive care. She's breathing with assistance, and her condition is guarded but stable. The next 48 to 72 hours will be critical for determining her long-term prognosis." Professor Blackwood, who had been listening quietly, asked the question that I had been expecting. "What about brain damage? How long was Luna without adequate oxygen?" It was a difficult question to answer with certainty. We don't know exactly how long Luna was in distress before the delivery. The placental abruption could have been developing gradually over several hours, or it might have occurred suddenly. Dr. Winters has done extensive testing, and while there are some concerning signs, it's too early to determine the extent of any neurological effects. Babies are remarkably adaptable, especially when they receive prompt medical care. Over the next week, I spent considering. Celestine's situation was more complicated. The placental abruption had caused significant blood loss, and the hours of labor in near freezing temperatures had put additional stress on her cardiovascular system. Dr. Montenegro and Dr. Chang worked methodically to control the bleeding, remove damaged tissue, and restore normal blood flow to her vital organs. By 10:15 p.m., they had managed to stabilize her condition enough to close the surgical incision and transfer her to our intensive care unit. Luna was moved to our level IV NICU, where she was placed on a ventilator and connected to the most advanced monitoring equipment we had available. Her initial brain scans showed some signs of oxygen deprivation, though Dr. Winters was cautiously optimistic that the damage might not be permanent. Babies are remarkably resilient, especially when they receive prompt medical intervention, and Luna had several factors working in her favor. This was when my role in their story truly began to take shape, though I had no way of understanding at the time just how extraordinary and inexplicable the coming weeks would prove to be. As the senior midwife, I was responsible for coordinating care between our various departments, serving as the primary liaison with Celestine's family, and providing the kind of ongoing support that families need when facing extended hospital stays and uncertain outcomes. Celestine's parents, Dr. Marcus Blackwood and Professor Ophelia Blackwood, arrived at Moonstone Regional early the next morning, having driven through the night from their home in Spokane. Marcus was a retired veterinarian who had spent his career working with wildlife rehabilitation programs, and Ophelia was a professor of comparative literature at Eastern Washington University who specialized in nature writing and environmental philosophy. They were intelligent, thoughtful people who had supported Celestine's decision to pursue her unconventional career as a wilderness photographer, even when it meant she would be living far from family and taking risks that worried them. "How are they?" Dr. Blackwood asked me when I met them in our family consultation room early Saturday morning. "The doctors told us the surgery went well, but we need to understand what we're really dealing with here." I explained the medical situation as clearly and honestly as I could. "Celestine is stable but still sedated, while her body recovers from the surgery and the hypothermia. The blood loss was significant, but Dr. Montenegro was able to control the bleeding, and all of her vital signs are improving. Luna is in our NICU receiving intensive care. She's breathing with assistance, and her condition is guarded but stable. The next 48 to 72 hours will be critical for determining her long-term prognosis." Professor Blackwood, who had been listening quietly, asked the question that I had been expecting. "What about brain damage? How long was Luna without adequate oxygen?" It was a difficult question to answer with certainty. We don't know exactly how long Luna was in distress before the delivery. The placental abruption could have been developing gradually over several hours, or it might have occurred suddenly. Dr. Winters has done extensive testing, and while there are some concerning signs, it's too early to determine the extent of any neurological effects. Babies are remarkably adaptable, especially when they receive prompt medical care. Over the next week, I spent considerable time with the Blackwood family, providing regular updates on both patients and helping them navigate the complex emotions of having both their daughter and granddaughter fighting for recovery simultaneously. The waiting rooms of intensive care units have a particular quality of suspended time, where hours can feel like days, and small changes in medical status take on enormous significance. Celestine remained sedated for the first 4 days, as her body healed from the surgery and the trauma of her mountain ordeal. Her physical recovery was proceeding as expected. The surgical incision was healing well, her blood levels were returning to normal, and the hypothermia had been successfully reversed. But when Dr. Montenegro began reducing her sedation to allow her to regain consciousness naturally, Celestine remained unresponsive in a way that concerned the medical team. Her brain scans showed no signs of stroke or significant injury. Her neurological reflexes appeared normal, and there was no obvious medical reason why she shouldn't be waking up as her sedation wore off. Dr. Montenegro consulted with neurological specialists from Seattle, but they couldn't identify any specific cause for her continued unconsciousness. Luna's progress in the NICU was more encouraging, but remained tenuous. She had been weaned off the ventilator after 3 days and was breathing independently, which was an excellent sign for her neurological development. Her brain scans showed improvement, with the initial signs of oxygen deprivation appearing less severe than Dr. Winters had initially feared. She was beginning to gain weight, and was showing normal reflexes for a premature baby. But there was something unusual about Luna that I began to notice during my daily visits to check on her progress. Unlike most premature babies, who spend most of their time sleeping and show limited awareness of their surroundings, Luna seemed remarkably alert and responsive to environmental changes. When I would speak to her, she would turn her head toward my voice. When her grandparents would visit and talk to her through the NICU glass, she would become more active and seem to focus in their direction. Most significantly, Luna rarely cried. Premature babies typically cry frequently as their nervous systems develop and they adjust to life outside the womb. But Luna was unusually calm, almost as if she was waiting for something or someone. Dr. Winters noted this in her medical records, but couldn't find any clinical explanation for Luna's atypical behavior patterns. 2 weeks after the emergency delivery, I was making my evening rounds in the NICU when I experienced the first of what would become a series of events that would fundamentally challenge my understanding of consciousness, maternal-infant bonding, and the nature of awareness itself. It was November 28th, a Thursday evening, and I was checking on Luna one final time before ending my shift. She had been having a restless day, more agitated. What I discovered the next morning would change everything I thought I knew about the connection between mothers and their children, and ultimately forced me to question the very nature of consciousness itself. When I arrived at Moonstone Regional that Friday morning, I immediately went to check on Luna in the NICU. She was sleeping peacefully, her vital signs stable, showing no indication of the extraordinary moment we had shared the night before. But something compelled me to review the detailed logs that our night shift nurses kept on every patient. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Nurse Jennifer Walsh had documented something unusual in Luna's chart. Patient experienced period of unusual alertness, lasting approximately 15 seconds. Eyes opened, appeared to track movement in room, then returned to normal sleep patterns. No change in vital signs. My heart began racing as I read those words. Jennifer had witnessed the same thing I had, though her clinical description didn't capture the profound awareness I had seen in Luna's eyes. But what made my blood run cold was what I discovered when I checked the ICU records for the same time period. At exactly 9:47 p.m., Celestine had briefly regained consciousness for the first time since her surgery 2 weeks earlier. According to the ICU nurse's notes, she had opened her eyes, looked around the room with apparent recognition, and spoken a single sentence before immediately losing consciousness again. "Please help me find my baby. She's calling for me." The precise timing was impossible to dismiss as coincidence. At the exact moment, Luna had opened her impossibly aware eyes, and I had heard Celestine's voice calling out desperately. Celestine had awakened 3 floors away, speaking words that perfectly matched what I had heard in the NICU. I immediately contacted Dr. Montenegro and shared my observations. She was skeptical but intrigued enough to order additional monitoring for both patients. Over the next week, the pattern repeated itself with clockwork precision. Every evening at exactly 9:47 p.m., Luna would open her eyes with that same profound awareness, and simultaneously, Celestine would briefly awaken in the ICU, always asking about her baby, before quickly losing consciousness again. The medical team was baffled. There was no scientific explanation for this synchronized behavior, particularly given that Celestine remained unconscious during all other hours of the day and showed no other signs of neurological improvement. Her brain scans remained unchanged, her responses to stimuli were minimal, and by all conventional measures, she should not have been capable of conscious thought or speech. But the evening awakenings continued, always at precisely 9:47 p.m., always lasting exactly 15 seconds, and always accompanied by Luna's extraordinary display of awareness in the NICU. It was as if mother and daughter were somehow communicating across the floors of the hospital through a connection that transcended physical separation and medical understanding. On December 6th, 3 weeks after that first synchronized awakening, I made a decision that would fundamentally alter the course of both their recoveries. Despite hospital protocols that typically kept NICU babies separated from patients in other units, I convinced Dr. Montenegro to allow me to bring Luna to Celestine's ICU room during one of these evening episodes. At 9:45 p.m., I carefully transported Luna in a portable isolette to Celestine's bedside. As 9:47 approached, I positioned Luna's isolette directly next to Celestine's hospital bed and waited with a mixture of scientific curiosity and profound apprehension. What happened next will remain the most extraordinary moment of my entire medical career. At exactly 9:47 p.m., both mother and daughter opened their eyes simultaneously, but this time, instead of the brief 15-second episode we had witnessed for weeks, they remained conscious and alert. Celestine turned her head toward Luna's isolette, and Luna turned toward her mother, and for the first time since the emergency delivery, they looked directly at each other. The machines monitoring both patients began registering something unprecedented. Their heart rates synchronized perfectly, their breathing patterns matched exactly, and their brain wave patterns, as measured by the EEG equipment, showed identical rhythms. It was as if their neurological systems were operating in perfect harmony, connected by something that medical science couldn't measure or explain. Celestine spoke, her voice weak but clear. "Hello, my beautiful Luna. Mommy's been trying to reach you." Luna, despite being only 3 weeks old and having suffered oxygen deprivation during birth, responded with sounds that were far more complex and intentional than any newborn should have been capable of producing. She wasn't crying or making random baby noises. She was unmistakably attempting to communicate with her mother. This extraordinary connection lasted for nearly an hour. During that time, Celestine remained fully conscious and alert, answering questions about her condition, asking detailed questions about Luna's medical care, and demonstrating complete cognitive function, despite having been essentially comatose for 3 weeks. Most remarkably, during this hour of connection, Luna's vital signs showed dramatic improvement. Her oxygen saturation levels increased, her heart rate stabilized in the optimal range for her age, and her neurological responses became stronger and more consistent than they had been since her birth. When the connection finally ended, both mother and daughter gradually returned to their previous states, Celestine losing consciousness and Luna returning to typical newborn sleep patterns, but something fundamental had changed. From that night forward, Celestine began showing steady neurological improvement during regular daytime hours, and Luna's development accelerated at an unprecedented rate. Within 2 weeks, Celestine had fully regained consciousness and was participating actively in her physical rehabilitation. The medical team could find no explanation for her recovery, particularly given the lack of any significant changes in her brain imaging studies. According to everything we understood about consciousness and brain injury, her awakening should have been medically impossible. Luna's progress was equally extraordinary. She began meeting developmental milestones weeks ahead of schedule. Her brain scans showed complete resolution of the oxygen deprivation damage, and she demonstrated levels of alertness and responsiveness that amazed the NICU staff. By Christmas Day, she was healthy enough to be discharged home with her mother, but the most profound change was in me. Witnessing that connection between Celestine and Luna had shattered every assumption I held about consciousness, awareness, and the bonds between mothers and their children. I began questioning how many other patients I had treated over the years might have been far more aware than conventional medicine recognized. I started paying closer attention to the subtle cues that families often reported, but that medical professionals typically dismissed as wishful thinking. I began approaching each case with the assumption that consciousness might persist in ways our instruments couldn't detect, and I discovered that this shift in perspective revealed patterns and connections I had never noticed before. The weight of these realizations became overwhelming. How many mothers and babies had I separated when they might have needed that connection for healing? How many families had I told there was no hope when perhaps there were forms of awareness and communication happening beyond medical understanding? 6 months after Luna's discharge, I found myself unable to continue practicing with the same certainty I had once possessed. Every case involving consciousness, brain injury, or premature infants reminded me of the limitations of medical knowledge and the possibility that we were missing crucial aspects of human awareness and connection. I submitted my resignation from Moonstone Regional Medical Center 3 weeks ago. In my letter, I cited personal reasons for leaving, but the truth is far more complex. Celestine and Luna's case had revealed to me that consciousness, awareness, and the bonds between mothers and children operate on levels that transcend our current scientific understanding. Celestine and Luna are thriving today. Luna is now a healthy, remarkably intelligent toddler who seems to possess an unusual sensitivity to the emotions and needs of others. Celestine has returned to her photography, creating a new series called Invisible Connections that explores the unseen bonds between all living things. They visit me occasionally, and every time I see Luna's eyes, those same violet blue eyes that first opened with such impossible awareness in the NICU, I'm reminded of the profound mysteries that still surround human consciousness and the connections that bind us to one another. I've moved to a smaller practice now, focusing on routine medical care, but I've never stopped thinking about that night when mother and daughter found each other across the barriers of space, medical equipment, and conventional understanding. Their case serves as a constant reminder that medicine, for all its advances, still has much to learn about the deepest aspects of human experience. The eyes that still haunt my dreams aren't frightening anymore, they're humbling. They remind me that consciousness, love, and the connections between souls operate according to laws we don't yet understand, and that sometimes the most profound healing happens in ways that science cannot measure, but the heart knows to be absolutely real. Those eyes changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the miraculous moment when two souls recognize each other across any distance. And for that transformation, despite the career it cost me, I will always be grateful.